Hello, looks like we're broadcasting, so welcome to Philosophy Roulette 90, where we read philosophy papers and review them live. If you have any suggestions out there in Twitch TV land or on YouTube, just leave a comment and let me know, and I can go take a look at anything you want me to take a look at. Assuming I haven't already done it, because I'm at 90 already. But yeah, I'd love to have another suggestion, so otherwise, let's just see what's new. French. Don't read French. Exactly. More French. Okay, Australasian journal. I'm a little wary. I mean, it'd have to be the shortest papers in this journal. So, let's, oopsie. Wrong button. Take a look, though. Because their, page count in Australasian Journal of Philosophy is, has minimum 4,500 words. I've sent stuff there and had it rejected because it was too short. I was like, oh, they were just like, withdraw. I was like, alright, I will. So it's like, this is like, well, 12 pages. But let's see, maybe 14 pages. 3 pages, yes, review. 13 pages. So let's click on that. Let's see what we got. Grounding on the domain of reasons. That's 15. 3 pages review. Did I do this one? Yeah, I did this one. This was a nice paper on yeah, this was very nice on eating meat and defending that. Assuming the animal has a life worth living, then it is justified to eat meat if you discount all the other terrible things. But just on the animal's well-being, it is okay to eat meat because the animal itself would have not had a good life, or had any life, without you having sponsored it by being a meat eater, in some sense. Okay, so let's also check out what's forthcoming. Moral luck. And it's here, so we're going to do this probably. Unless there's some like really cool... Alright, that isn't there unless something's like really cool right here. Let's see. 1 to 14 on this one. 1 to 16. Oh yeah, I have it up to 16. Although it would sort of make me worried. 1 to 15 fallibilists. Let's see what else we got. Dynamic non-classicality. Ooh. Epistemic modals. Invalidate the classic laws of exclude mill and non-contradiction. Epistemic non-contradiction. I should read this just in general. Oh, Matthew Mandelkrant. I've read some of his stuff before, so okay. Yeah. Okie dokie. Duties to oneself. Ooh, 112. Our philosophers argue that duties to oneself are paradoxical. They seem to have an incoherent power to release oneself from obligations. I argue that self-release is possible with as a matter of deontic logic and meta-ethics. Okay, this looks like a lot of fun stuff. I should come back to Australasian Journal of Philosophy more often. P and Phis and stuff. Quasios. Okay, so I shouldn't be discriminatory against the word count in Australasian Journal of Philosophy because they have plenty that are on the shorter end, even if they're just there. Okay, anywho. So, let's actually download this first to see if this actually is the length I'm hoping it is. 15 pages, and is it like a teeny font? Yeah, it is. So it'll take a while, but I'll do it. Alright. So if you join me live, you can get a link to this full papers page by typing !paper in the chat box, and the link will pop back up. And away we go. No abstract. One way to frame the problem of moral luck is as a contradiction in our ordinary ideas about moral responsibility. For example, 2 agents drive recklessly around a curb with a K. I wonder where this, do they spell it like this overseas? Because that's not how we spell curb in the US. In the same way, one but not the other kills a pedestrian. On the other hand, we intuit that the killer driver deserves more blame than the merely reckless driver, because only the killer driver causes the death of a pedestrian. On the other hand, we intuit that the drivers are equally blameworthy because luck cannot even partially determine the degree of an agent's blameworthiness. So in terms of this example, the problem with moral luck is that we intuit that the drivers are and are not equally blameworthy. This is a case of luck in results. We have similar contradictory intuitions to cases of luck in circumstances and character as well. The character response to the problem of moral luck is roughly that because people are originally praiseworthy and blameworthy in virtue of, and only in virtue of, their good and bad character traits, the drivers must be equally blameworthy due to their identical bad character. Subsequently, proponents of this response offer an error theory for the intuition that the killer driver is more blameworthy. Even though the basic character response has been proposed several times in the last few decades, it has yet to receive sustained critical appraisal. I argue against the character response. In section 2, I explicate two versions of the character response, and in the process, I also lay out Thomas Nagel's taxonomy of resultant, circumstantial, constitutive, and causal moral luck. In section 3 and 4, I argue that each version of the character response is problematic for two reasons. Their underlying accounts of moral responsibility are subject to difficulties, and contrary to appearances, they do not offer good solutions to the problem of moral luck. In section 5, I show how proponents of moral luck can preserve a kernel of truth from the character response. The character response. Various philosophers offer the character response as part of a solution of moral luck. Welcome to the chat room. Thank you. Very strange. Problem of moral luck. Here are a few representative descriptions. The difference between the would-be thief who lacks opportunity and his cousin who gets and seizes it is not one of moral condition, which by hypothesis is the same on both sides. Their moral record may differ, but their moral standing does not. The difference at issue is not moral, but merely epistemic. The moral record of judges, actual and counterfactual, are different. One took a bribe and the other did not. Moreover, they are not similarly culpable. One is guilty of bribe taking and the other is not. But do we regard actual with a moral indignation that would be out of place in respect to counterfactual? I hardly think so. Would you have God throw an actual into a deeper circle of hell than counterfactual? That would be rank injustice in him. I submit that Karl is blameworthy for being such that he would betray a Jew if he knew where one was hiding, and that he is blameworthy for that to the same degree as Heinrich is for being such that he would betray a Jew if he knew where one was hiding, and for actually betraying a Jew. Okay, even though there are more important differences between the views of these theorists, their most basic position appears to be the same, namely that a person deserves a degree of praise and blame in virtue of, and only in virtue of, features of her character. The person who steals deserves no more or less blame than a person with the same character who would have stolen in that circumstance. Two judges with identical corrupt character are equally blameworthy, even though only one of them takes a bribe. Karl is just as blameworthy as Heinrich, precisely because Karl's character is also such that he would have betrayed a Jewish person if he had the opportunity. The character response appears to be a moderate anti-luck position, in part because it implies a certain kind of resultant moral luck does not exist. Resultant moral luck occurs when an agent performs an action or a mission with a consequence that is at least partially beyond her control, and consequence positively affects her praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. By positively affects, I mean that the luck at issue does not undermine praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. Recall the examples of the two reckless drivers. According to the character response, both drivers deserve the same degree of blame in virtue of, and only in virtue of, their identical bad character. But then the consequence of the agent's choice, even if it is the kind of consequence that the agent could reasonably have been expected to foresee, does not itself affect her degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. The character response also implies that a certain kind of circumstantial moral luck does not exist. Circumstantial moral luck occurs when it is outside the agent's control whether she faces a morally significant challenge or opportunity, and positively affects her praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. To borrow Thompson's example, both judges deserve the same degree of blame for their identical bad character, but it is only the agent's character that determines her degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. The agent's character being manifested in action does not affect her degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. Yeah, this circumstantial stuff, you get a lot of this because, like, rich people don't have to make hard decisions because they're not hungry. It's like, so you have to, just because someone is stealing because they're hungry or in a bad situation, it's like, well, stealing is bad. It's like, yeah, but they're going to starve. And so it's like, it's very easy to be there's always a problem of, like, if you're not hungry, then you're not really in the same circumstance, and like your whole concept of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness is a little off kilter, I think. Someone's laughing in the background here. I don't know if you can hear that. It's a little strange. Whether the character response eliminates constitutive and causal moral luck depends on whether an agent must have voluntarily acquired the character in virtue of which she deserves praise and blame. On the one hand, Norman Richards thinks that such a character must be voluntarily acquired, referred to his view as the voluntarist character response, VCR, not a video cassette recorder, and consider how it rules out certain kinds of constitutive moral luck. Constitutive moral luck occurs when an agent's dispositions or capacities are not voluntarily acquired, and they positively affect her praiseworthiness or blameworthiness for a character trait or action. VCR eliminates at least many kinds of constitutive moral luck because the agents are not praiseworthy or blameworthy in virtue of non-voluntarily acquired character trait parts, and agents are not derivatively praiseworthy or blameworthy for actions that exclusively issue from voluntarily acquired character traits. Whether VCR is compatible with causal moral luck depends on further specification of the view. Causal moral luck occurs when the laws of nature and past states of affairs that are outside of a person's control causally determine what she does and thereby positively affect her praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. VCR would rule out causal moral luck if the relevant kind of voluntary contribution to character requires indeterminism, because such contributions would not be causally lucky. But if the relevant kind of voluntariness does require indeterminism, then VCR is compatible with causal moral luck. Okay, so it has to be part of your character that even you are under control. So it's not just a situation, but your character itself has to be under your control too. Okay, on the other hand, Nicholas Rescher and Judith Jarvis Thompson do not think that the character in virtue of which a person deserves praise and blame must be voluntarily acquired, and we may refer to their view as the non-voluntarist character response, so not VCR. Not VCR allows for the existence of both constitutive and causal moral luck, because the agent's character can deserve praise and blame in virtue of non-voluntary acquired parts of her character. She may also be causally determined to have that kind of character. It is worth mentioning that VCR and not VCR do not rule out a diachronic kind of circumstantial moral luck. Consider Nagel's classic case. Someone who was an officer in a concentration camp may have led a quiet and harmless life if the Nazis had never come to power in Germany. And some who led a quiet and harmless life in Argentina might have become an officer in a concentration camp if he had not left Germany for business reasons in 1930. Diachronic circumstantial luck inevitably shapes the Nazis and Argentines' characters in different ways because their differing kinds of circumstances elicit different kinds of actions, and those different kinds of actions shape their character in qualitatively different ways over time. In such cases, the Nazis and the Argentines' characters are not held fixed in our evaluation of them, and so neither character response would evaluate them in the same way. Further, not VCR allows diachronic resultant moral luck to exist because the results of the killer driver's action, for example, can affect her character over time. In the usual case, causing the death of a pedestrian shatters a person's positive self-image, alienates her from herself, and stigmatizes her as a killer, and these properties significantly affect the way in which her character develops through time. VCR and not VCR offer anti-luck solutions of various strengths to the problem of moral luck because they do not allow luck to differentiate how much praise or blame the agents deserve in many of the standard case pairs, and yet they do not collapse into a skeptical view that no one is morally responsible for anything. Proponents of both responses offer error theories, explanations for why we have intuitions that are consistent with their errant status, for the intuitions involved in the affirming resultant and circumstantial moral luck. For example, Norman Richards and Nicholas Rescher suggest that the relevant intuitions confuse greater evidence of an agent's blameworthiness with an agent's being more blameworthy. So, evidence versus actually having the blame, actually deserving it. Okay, after all, the killer driver's reckless character is more evident to others than merely reckless driver character is due to the display of killing the pedestrian. Additionally, Rescher suggests that the relevant intuitions conflate legality and morality. The error comes from inferring the claim that the killer driver is more blameworthy from the claim that the killer driver merits more severe legal punishment. Peels, Richards, and Thompson suggest that there is confusion about what events are responsible for and how much blame they deserve. On their view, the killer driver is responsible for more things than the merely reckless driver is, namely the death of the pedestrian, but they deserve the same degree of blame. These error theories need not be in competition with one another, because there might be a multi-source confusion in the resultant and circumstantial moral intuitions. Yeah, I'm getting a really strong flavor of what I said earlier about like people just having good circumstances. Like you can, like reckless driving is like some of these. I think what they're saying right here is author is hinting as that it's very hard to pin down. I mean, like, what is reckless driving? You could kill somebody by like coughing at the wrong second. You weren't really being reckless, but the it's like, so like you could be slightly more reckless than usual, and just in 99.99999% of the time you're going to be fine. But like in one little itsy bit of recklessness, which happens just reasonably, you kill somebody, and it's like, well, you're a reckless driver. It's like, well, what exactly constitutes this sort of blameworthy object? And so I think these different, the legality, morality, and the ontology, I think, is another thing of the ontology of recklessness and character. We'll go into this as well. What is it to have a reckless character? I mean, that's not clear. Over the next two sections, I mean, it sounds sort of essentialist. Yeah. Over the next two sections, I argue that both character response are problematic as accounts of moral responsibility and as a good solution to the problem of moral luck. Against the non-voluntarist character response. The account of moral responsibility in not VCR is that a person is originally praiseworthy or blameworthy in virtue of and only in virtue of a good or bad character trait. Whether the character trait is voluntarily acquired is irrelevant to her overall degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness. As Rescher writes, for in such a case, it is exactly his avaricious disposition that condemns it. The fact that he did not come to by this disposition by choice is immaterial. One might think that I should characterize not VCR in a more minimal way, such that the voluntary contribution is merely not necessary for praiseworthiness or blameworthiness, instead of being irrelevant to them. The non-necessary claim is compatible with agreeing that degree of voluntary acquisition can affect how much praise or blame a person deserves for a character trait. The problem with the conjunction of the non-necessary claim and the claim about how degree of voluntary contribution can affect degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness is that they make N not VCR vulnerable to synchronic circumstantial moral luck. After all, NVCR implies that agents can only be only derivatively praiseworthy and blameworthy for actions that manifest character. If derivative praiseworthiness and blameworthiness can increase an agent's overall degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, she would be more praiseworthy or blameworthy for performing an action that manifests a certain character trait than she would be if she had no opportunity to perform such an action. But since such opportunities often involve circumstantial luck, this view would imply the existence of synchronic circumstantial moral luck. For example, the bribe taker would be more blameworthy overall than the mere would-be bribe taker, because the bribe taking would increase her overall degree of blameworthiness. But since proponents of not VCR find existing synchronic circumstantial moral luck to be unacceptable, we should retain the characterization of NVCR that the agent's degree of voluntary contribution to her character is irrelevant to her degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness. It's a mouthful, but it makes sense. Basically, because your praiseworthiness and blameworthiness adds up over time, if it's not always your fault, then you have to rule out the cases that change things along the way. So, yeah, existing synchronic circumstantial moral luck. If it's just circumstantial to be is unacceptable, then synchronic circumstantial luck. You have to rule out those cases. Okay. You don't want to give someone extra chance to be praiseworthy and blameworthy for situations that specifically are out of their control and modify their blameworthiness. There are various objections to this account of moral responsibility in the literature, but the objection I want to press is that not VCR cannot make the highly intuitive distinction between being bad and being blameworthy. To see why, consider the following thought experiment. Jim is a rare saint. Ooh, good for you, Jim. He has gone through the arduous process of acquiring all the moral virtues. All of them. Wow. But Jim has bad luck. A nefarious neurosurgeon has chosen Jim on the basis of a lottery to be the subject of his value transplant experiment. He kidnaps and experiments on Jim with the result that although Jim keeps all of his old memories and skills, he has a new set of values, namely all of the moral vices. As a result, Jim finds himself wanting to do all kinds of nasty things to others and would act on these desires if he had the opportunity and if there would not be too much blowback. Clearly, Jim's new character is bad character. He went from being a good person to a bad person through no fault of his own. In my view, this moral judgment is exactly right. Yeah, alright. So, if you can actually do that to somebody, but that's weird, but it's a weird thought experiment, but yeah, why would we blame Jim for what the neurosurgeon did to Jim? But NVCR implies also that Jim went from being very praiseworthy to being very blameworthy through no fault of his own, which is very counterintuitive. In fact, NVCR counterintuitively implies even that Jim deserves exactly as much blame as someone who voluntarily acquired all the same moral vices, because voluntary acquisition of character is relevant to degree of blameworthiness. These counterintuitive implications provide a reason to think that the account of moral responsibility presupposed in NVCR is implausible. Yeah, so it seems like this is the, you don't have to make it in such sort of like science fiction-y terms. Say you just grew up in a bad neighborhood and the only way that you live is doing very bad things. That's like, okay, and everyone else dies. Like, basically you're maybe like one of those child soldiers, and if you don't shoot at other people, they shoot you. So you have like all this like bad stuff happen to you. It's like, are you blaming them? No, it was the people that turned you into a child soldier that makes it, it's their fault, not your fault. You just didn't want to die. It's like, and then you swap that person with another person that had that grew up in a nice area with like plenty to eat and a roof over their head, like no big deal. It's like you swap those people and then you blame one for one thing and the other for the other. Yeah, probably not. It's like, okay. So even if this account of moral responsibility were plausible, it would not offer a good solution to the problem of moral luck, given the parameters intrinsic to the problem. The most fundamental way to formulate the problem of moral luck is in terms of the control required for morally responsible agency, which is how Nagel describes it. It is intuitively plausible that one cannot be morally assessed for what is due to factors beyond their control. One cannot be more culpable or estimable for anything than one is for that fraction of which it is under one's control. Everything seems to result from the combined influence of factors antecedent and posterior to action that are not within the agent's control. Thus, the area of genuine agency, and therefore of legitimate moral judgment, seems to shrink under the scrutiny to an extinctionless point. So it's getting squeezed out. In other words, the problem of moral luck is about how the intuitive control condition of moral responsibility threatens to undermine our ordinary belief about the scope of morally responsible agency, because who we are and what we do and what consequences we bring about are always greatly affected by factors outside our control. Ain't that the truth? Hello, coronavirus. This is why I'm at 90 philosophy roulettes right now. A good solution to this problem must show how we can plausibly preserve at least most of our ordinary beliefs about the control condition for moral responsibility and about the scope of the praise and blame that we deserve. If, for example, accepting the intuitive control condition on moral responsibility leads to moral responsibility skepticism, this would not be a solution to the problem, but instead a capitulation, because this acceptance would accommodate our common sense beliefs about the control condition on moral responsibility at the expense of our common sense beliefs about the scope of morally responsible agency. Here then are two mutually exhaustive kinds of solution. Luck-free solutions adopt the Nagelian control condition according to which luck is irrelevant to moral responsibility. A success condition for this kind of solution is to explain how adopting the luck-free control condition does not lead to moral responsibility skepticism. Moral luck solutions reject the Nagelian control condition and allow that at least some kinds of luck to affect how much praise and blame people deserve. Success conditions for this kind of solution include explanation of how the revised condition does not lead to moral responsibility, skepticism, and 2, why the revised control condition is the one about which we have always cared, and 3, how we could have confused it with Nagel's control condition. Yeah, I mean, the luck-free solutions is where most people do, and these conditions that the author has laid out, nicely said author, is the problem. So this is, I think, some papers I read and I don't think the arguments are well laid out. I don't usually say that. Sometimes I say I'm confused because I am confused, or sometimes I'm not confused. I just say I'm confused because I think it was poorly written. But this is well laid out. So and was not written by, I mean, for all I know, this person is a logician, but at least it's not obviously translated from like technical language back into English. Because those people sort of drive me. No, I like the papers. They're great papers. It's just, it's hard to read out loud, to be repeating the same formulaic sentences over and over. Okay. According to this characterization, NVCR is an instance of moral luck solution because it permits the existence of at least constitutive and causal moral luck. It is important to bear in mind that although NVCR has particular luck-free implications in cases of synchronic, resultant, and circumstantial moral luck, it is not a luck-free solution as I have defined it. Okay. Nevertheless, the NVCR, not VCR, is not a good solution because it cannot satisfy the full range of success conditions for a moral luck solution. NVCR does not explain how its moral responsibility requirements avoid moral responsibility skepticism and how they could have been confused with Nagel's control condition. The basic idea is that both NVCR and Nagel's moral responsibility requirements imply that agency in many standard case pairs are equally praiseworthy and blameworthy. For example, the drivers are equally blameworthy and the corrupt judges are equally blameworthy. Even so, NVCR cannot explain why its moral responsibility requirement is the one about which we have always cared, because NVCR waters down Nagel's control condition to such an extent that it rejects agency as a prerequisite for originative moral responsibility. In fact, there is no control-relevant restriction in NVCR's fundamental object of moral responsibility. In other words, NVCR implies that the source of the agent's degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthy is wholly independent of a control-based restriction. For this reason, NVCR cannot explain why we were inclined to care about Nagel's control condition in the first place. Allow me to emphasize this point as a comparison with a view of moral responsibility that accepts resultant moral luck. Consider that the proponent of resultant moral luck can embrace the following control principle. An agent is praiseworthy or blameworthy for something only if it depends on factors under her control. Someone, Nelkin, or let's compare Nelkin. Okay. Someone who thinks that the killer driver is more blameworthy than the merely reckless driver can embrace the control principle because the killer driver's causing the death of a pedestrian depends on factors within her control, the voluntary choice to drive recklessly, even though it is also affected by factors outside her control, the spatial location of the pedestrian. So, because the killer driver's consequence satisfies the necessary condition of moral responsibility set out by the control principle, it follows that the control principle is compatible with the judgment that the killer driver is more blameworthy. Notice that NVCR is an account of moral responsibility with a weaker control requirement than the one embraced even by proponents of resultant moral luck, because NVCR implies the denial of the control principle. NVCR implies that it is not the case that an agent is praiseworthy or blameworthy for something only if it depends on something within their control, because NVCR is just the view that the trait need not depend on something within our control to be praiseworthy or blameworthy in virtue of it. Thus, since this version of the control principle is significantly weaker than Nagel's control principle, and NVCR implies the denial even of the weaker control principle, NVCR's moral responsibility requirement is far too weak to explain plausibly why we ever cared about Nagel's control condition. One might reasonably wonder why we should worry that NVCR is not a good solution given parameters set by the problem of moral luck. After all, every moral luck solution is revisionary to some degree, and if NVCR is the correct account of moral responsibility, then whatever it implies about the problem of moral luck is what we should think about the topic, and may include thinking that those core parameters are mistaken. We should, however, carry that NVCR is not a good solution according to the criteria intrinsic to the problem of moral luck, because an account of moral responsibility, being able to offer a good solution to the problem of moral luck, is a desideratum for a plausible account of moral responsibility. I'm not sure. I mean, why should we believe this or the not a good solution over the people who say NVCR is right? Alright, maybe you'll get to that. That is, an account of ability to offer a good solution to the problem of moral luck adds a point of plausibility to that account's overall scorecard in comparison to other accounts that cannot offer a good solution. Yeah, it may turn out that NVCR is the most plausible over account of moral responsibility, despite its faring worse than other accounts with respect to providing a good solution to the problem of moral luck. The problem is who's in charge of the scorecard here. This point of plausibility, an overall scorecard. Who's in charge of that? Because if it's the NVCR people, they're just going to rank the scorecard differently. And so I'm not sure about this argument right here, because if the NVCR people are making the scorecard, they're going to be the, in the old school terminology, they're going to be the Russian judge. I mean, they're giving themselves a 10. So it's like, I'm not sure that this argument goes through. But anyway, let's finish up the paragraph. In that case, whatever NVCR implies about the problem is moral luck is what we should believe about. Yeah. Even so, I pressed a reason to doubt the plausibility of NVCR, and we learned here that NVCR does not get a plausibility point for its scorecard in virtue of its being a good solution to the problem of moral luck, which is itself an important result. Yeah. Instantly, Richard's VCR avoids both problems. VCR implies that Jim is not blameworthy in virtue of his newfound character traits because he did not voluntarily acquire them. And VCR is consistent with the control principle because VCR implies that we are morally responsible only for the character that depends on exercises of control. What is control then? No, I don't know. Even though VCR is not subject to these problems, it is vulnerable to a new set of difficulties. Against the voluntarist character response. The account of moral responsibility in VCR is that a person is originally praiseworthy and blameworthy in virtue of, and only in virtue of, a character trait that has been enacted and voluntarily acquired. The enactment condition turns out to be trivial. Okay. Richard holds that all character traits are enacted, and he maintains that a desert is determined by the nature of the character trait itself and not by features of the action it displays. As a result, luck can affect when a person deserves praise and blame for a character trait and in what kind of action it is displayed, but not how much praise and blame the agent deserves overall. Richard puts the voluntariness condition in this way. But if the individual makes any contribution whatsoever to the sort of person he is, that contribution can be the basis for his deserving praise or blame for what he does. It could be that one's character is shaped entirely by forces beyond one's control. If so, the practicing of attributing responsibility is undermined. More specifically, Richard's view is that the agents are praiseworthy or blameworthy for a respectively good or bad character trait in proportion to the degree that the agent has voluntarily contributed to her character. I contend that the VCR's voluntariness requirement creates three potential difficulties for the general account of moral responsibility and has moderately skeptical implication that is a mark against its being a good solution to the problem of moral luck. First, VCR may imply that the degree of deserved praise and blame is vague. After all, it may be metaphysically vague. What's up? Oh, hey, you misspelled that. Hey, Martel. Blah, 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 blah. Can't speak. After all, it might be metaphysically vague what an agent's contribution is to her character. That is, it's going well. That is, there might not be a part of a character trait that is one's own doing and part that one is merely lucky to have. Yeah, we're talking about praiseworthy and blameworthiness of as like a character trait. Like, are you only to blame for your character as opposed to the things that happen to you in life, because that things that happen to your life usually are kind of just matter of luck, really. So only what's up to you. Is that how we understand what praiseworthy and blameworthiness depends on? Okay, but since the voluntariness voluntariness requirement proportions to the degree of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness to the degree of voluntary contribution. The precise degree of praise or blame that an agent deserves would be vague if the degree of the agent's contribution is metaphysically vague. Yeah, but I mean, again, this is like, so how vague does it need to be before we can't blame or praise someone there? So it depends on how metaphysically vague things are. I mean, it might not be that bad. Second, VCR's voluntariness requirement is unmotivated when considered alongside another part of Richard's account of moral responsibility. Richards endorses the utilitarian proposal that deserving praise and blame accounts to deserving encouragement or reconditioning and re-educative responses. I don't know what that means. Presumably, the rationale for focusing desert of praise and blame on character is to promote the good of everyone, or at least to cultivate the moral agency of the person praised or blamed. This utilitarian proposal, however, makes the voluntariness restriction implausible, because non-voluntary acquired bad character traits would be worthy of the same reconditioning and educative responses as voluntarily acquired bad character traits. In both cases, those responses would aim to promote the good of everyone and of the person being praised and blamed. Thus, the voluntariness requirement is unmotivated for Richards. Okay, so yeah, so if you make it utilitarian, I guess it would just be the same thing for all traits and wouldn't it takes away the praise and blame from it. Okay. Third, for VCR's voluntariness requirement either leads to a vicious regress or abandons the character view of moral responsibility on the assumption that the agent is either derivatively or originally morally responsible for the actions that contribute to her character trait and confers it to praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. Okay, well, what is this? On the one hand, suppose that the agent is merely derivatively responsible for the actions that contribute to a character trait and confers it to praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. In that case, a person's action A confers praiseworthiness or blameworthiness onto her character trait CT, if A manifests a different character trait CT1, in virtue of which she deserves praise or blame for A. The problem with this proposal is that it leads to a regress that implies responsibility skepticism. For her to deserve praise or blame for CT1, there must have been an earlier action A1 that contributed to having CT1 that manifested the different character trait CT2, and so on and so on. So here we go. And the agent must have also been praiseworthy or blameworthy in virtue of CT2 to be derivatively praiseworthy or blameworthy for A1. Likewise, to be praiseworthy or blameworthy for CT2, there must have been an earlier action A2 that contributed to CT2 that manifested a different character trait CT3. The agent must have been praiseworthy or blameworthy in virtue of CT3, and to be derivatively praiseworthy for A2, and we're off to the races. Yeah. This sort of regress is problematic precisely because the chain of actions would eventually trace back to the character traits to which the agent does not contribute that provide the background conditions for her first action. Yeah, so it'll be blame the society and parents at that point as the initial conditions, and then you're off to the races eventually. In such a case, the agent cannot be derivatively praiseworthy or blameworthy for her first action, because by hypothesis the agent has not contributed to the character that gives rise to that action. But then there is no praiseworthiness or blameworthiness to go up the causal chain in the first place, thus justifying the voluntariness requirement through derivatively morally responsible action inevitably leads to moral responsibility skepticism. You know, I remember someone, this is a million years ago, saying that like Kantian, some version of Kantianism ethically says you don't actually get to be until you're an adult, it doesn't sort of like Kantianism actually doesn't kick in. So when you're a kid, you don't understand it, so you can't have been a Kantian. And so at a certain point, you just get the, you sort of receive the ability to think like independently at some point, like I guess when you're a teenager. And so that would be the like unmoved mover that would give you the, like some sort of like miraculous start to the causal chain, but you don't get that at birth. You get that a little bit later, and that's how I've heard people get around this sort of problem before. Get like some sort of deontological free will. On the other hand, suppose that the agent is originally more responsible for action that contributes to a character trait and confers to it praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. Such a proposal would straightforwardly explain why people are morally responsible for character only if it is cultivated through voluntary actions, because we are originally praiseworthy or blameworthy only for our actions, and such actions confer derivative praiseworthiness and blameworthiness to the character traits to which they contribute. But this proposal amounts to the categorical rejection of Richard's account of moral responsibility and his anti-circumstantial moral luck position. His view is that we are originally morally responsible in virtue of character and derivatively morally responsible in virtue of actions, and the bribe taker would be more blameworthy overall than the mere would-be bribe taker, even though they have the same bad character, because only the bribe taker performs a blameworthy action and people are originally praiseworthy and blameworthy in virtue of their actions. The proponent of VCR might want to reject the assumption that generates the dilemma. In that case, the voluntary actions contribute to a character trait would be a mere constitutive condition on moral responsibility for that character trait. An agent need not be morally responsible for the voluntary action because the action would not itself confer moral responsibility to the character trait. A lingering worry about this view is that whether it can be motivated. If voluntary actions confer praiseworthiness and blameworthiness to character traits, it is obvious why the proponent of the character response would embrace the voluntariness requirement. But if the actions that contribute to character are not sufficient to confer praiseworthiness and blameworthiness to them, why should we think that the voluntariness requirement is true? It is noteworthy that philosophers attracted to a character view of moral responsibility tend to argue against control-based accounts of moral responsibility. Yeah. So it's like you have to reject this sort of how the control is actually part of the character traits. That's a good question though. So how exactly you could do that? All right. So maybe the author will explain this. That's good. Even if VCR were a plausible account of moral responsibility, it still would not offer a satisfying solution to the problem of moral luck because it is a moderately skeptical view. Even if we are morally responsible for our character to the degree that it is voluntarily required, and if we have very little voluntary control over our character, we would be morally responsible for very little. Well, maybe we are. Without exploring the empirical question of exactly how much control we have over our character, it seems uncontroversial to say that we do not have a lot of control over our character. Yeah, we do not, example, have direct control. We cannot just decide to be more compassionate or less jealous, and thereby become more compassionate or less jealous in that instant. Particular character traits may, however, be within our indirect control because we can influence our character traits to various degrees by performing certain kinds of actions and can foresee the basic morally significant features of the consequences of those actions. Some ways to foreseeably influence character include going to therapy, reading biographies of virtuous people, surrounding ourselves with virtuous people, setting goals, virtue labeling ourselves, nudging ourselves intentionally, selecting our circumstances, reflecting to become more aware of our motivations, joining a religious community, or asking for divine help. Still, it should be emphasized that changing character is taxing and often unsuccessful. Yeah, so, it seems very prone to luck. Think, for example, about the massive number of failed New Year's resolutions each February. And for people who do successfully implement some changes, it seems plausible that they cannot intentionally change many features of their character even over the course of a single year given limited resources of time, effort, and opportunity. As a result, broad portions of character turn out not to be within our indirect control. It seems to follow then that VCR collapses into at least a moderate form of responsibility skepticism, which is a mark against it as a good solution to the problem of moral luck. Okay, so almost done. This is getting there. Yeah. If my arguments are on track, VCR and VCR face real difficulties. One might infer from those difficulties that the character response has no insight to offer a solution to the problem of moral luck. I, however, think that the character response contains a kernel of truth and is part of a promising error theory for the intuitions that, for example, the drivers are equally blameworthy and the judges are equally blameworthy. John Greco and I offer an error theory that involves distinguishing between two common sense modes of moral evaluation. Person level evaluation is about whether someone is a good or bad person. The object of a person level evaluation is the agent's character, and as we observed in a previous section, character evaluation has various luck-free implications. Okay. It follows that two drivers are equally bad as persons and two judges equally bad as persons, at least if their character is evaluated synchronically. Responsibility level evaluation is about whether someone deserves praise and blame for her voluntary choices and their actual consequences that were reasonably foreseeable. On our view, responsibility level evaluation can be morally lucky in various ways. For example, the killer driver deserves more blame than the merely reckless driver, and the bribe taker deserves more blame than the merely would-be bribe taker. Okay. With this distinction in hand, we can explain why you're just separating out the two things here, so you can have, you're saying you're deconflating them, but like two things are conflated, but as the question is, well, okay, fine, we've got two different concepts of moral evaluation here, and then you have to figure out how they interact. Okay, with this, and so you got a dualistic theory here. With the distinction in hand, we can explain why the errant intuitions are so prevalent. We mistakenly infer from the claim that each driver is no worse a person than the other to the claim that each driver is no more blameworthy than the other. And we errantly infer from the claim that each judge is no worse a person than the other to the claim that each judge is no more blameworthy than the other. But these inferences are mistaken because being a bad person in a particular way leaves open the question of whether one is blameworthy for being bad in that way and to what extent. After all, being a good or bad person is about the agent's character, and being praiseworthy or blameworthy is about being accountable for one's voluntary choices and their actual outcomes that were reasonably foreseeable. Once we pry apart these two kinds of common sense moral evaluations that the character response collapses into each other, we can see the way in which the problem of moral luck arose in the first place. Our contradictory intuitions are about two different kinds of common sense moral evaluation that are easily confused with each other. There is, of course, more to say about this proposal. See this stuff. The point here is that there is a kernel of truth in the character response that can be used in a plausible error theory for the errant intuitions. I actually don't buy this as a response. This is, I think, defining yourself out of the problem here, author. You're separating out the two things, and then you're saying, well, one's over here, one's over there. But it's sort of like saying, well, like the killer's mother always loves them. It's like, well, Hitler's mother loved him. But what does that actually come down to? It means that someone's looking at the person in like, well, as their person, as their son, and then it's like, well, you're ignoring all the bad things that they did. So it's like, well, I'm sure their mother, like the killer's mother, still loves them because their killer's like mom's love is unconditional, and sort of like the theory here. But like that's sort of the whole point of saying something like that is that it misses the point. You're defining yourself out of the problem. So I'm a little worried about this dualist solution that the author is proposing, because I feel like it's getting to the, well, the killer's mother still loves them sort of objection. But okay. It does what the author wants it to. Let me back up a sec. It does exactly what the author wants it to do in the course of this paper. It does make room for having responsibility. The problem is, does it separate out too much of it? Music changed on me. The character response to the problem of moral luck has been offered several times over the last few decades, and until this paper it has largely gone unchallenged. I thought the challenge here was good. I should compliment the author on the well-reasoned and well-written paper here, even if I disagree with their solution. I have argued that NVCR and VCR are subject to difficulties both as accounts of moral responsibility and as good solutions to the problem of moral luck, but there is a kernel of truth in the character response. Well, I guess my exception that says the mother loved them, that would also be the kernel of truth, so that shows that they're right. I just don't know if it shows it's a good idea. This paper is part of a larger project in defense of moral luck in various places. I argue that the extent of moral luck is plausible in part by arguing against views that deny certain kinds of moral luck, including the skeptical view, counterfactual view, and asymmetry view. If my arguments here show that the character view is also implausible, this result would add even more weight to my cumulative case for the existence of resultant, circumstantial, and constitutive moral luck, because yet another way to deny certain kinds of moral luck would turn out to be implausible. Okay, yeah, so nice paper. Good paper. Yeah, and good topic too. I think I said basically everything I want to say just right before the conclusion here, because the squeeze argument that the author is putting onto moral luck, either you have control or you don't, and then if you, like, on all sides you're getting squeezed, the amount of things that we're in control of gets pushed smaller and smaller because all of our history is contingent, and so starting with something that we couldn't have possibly controlled, and then to get out of that you have to, like, basically posit a miracle of, like, free will at some point, as I was mentioning the Kantians do. Oh, some Kantians do. And then if you have to posit just, like, this sort of, like, very slim sliver of control, what does it actually count as? So where is the responsibility that we have? So that's a good point. I do fear this is I'm getting a very, very, very Western style flavor of understanding of responsibility here, because I was thinking, it's like, maybe you can blame, like, and I feel like, and this is just terrible, but it's like you can blame someone's parents for the kid's bad character. In some sense, like, we do that even here. Is like, I think the sort of, like, culture and history has a different perspective in other parts of the world, but, like, you can still blame the parents here, and sometimes blaming the parents for the children's bad behavior, we sort of have problems with that because you want to have individual moral responsibility. But I feel like in the West we have very person-centered responsibility, but in other places maybe that's not going to be the case, or at least other philosophies, and so there might be a way to there might be some person-centered that might interfere with exactly maybe the vagueness condition that was being spoken about earlier. What exactly is it to have what is vague about being in control of certain things? Okay, so that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave a suggestion in the comments or send me a message if you want about anything, your comments on Philosophy Roulette or anything you want me to read. And stay safe, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.